Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this wonderful conversation. I've certainly been looking forward to having it. Today, we've got insights from incredible female talent and people leaders talking about how to drive meaningful change in your organization. And just quickly, I'm Taryn Ching. I'm the Director of People at Sense. And as you can see from our backgrounds, we are hosting this webinar. For those of you who might not be familiar with Sense, we provide an AI-powered talent engagement platform that helps talent acquisition professionals attract and ultimately hire great people. We offer a number of features that automate each stage in the hiring process, which frees talent leaders to focus on more impactful strategic initiatives like DEI programs and spending more of their work time building relationships with diverse candidates. And we're super excited to bring together this group of female talent leaders today. They'll share how they've gone about championing diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout their careers and what everyone in attendance, all of you, can do to make their organizations more inclusive places to work. All right, before we get started, I'm just gonna thank you for joining. We have Alexia and from Sense in our Zoom chat for Q&A, and we love and encourage your questions. We are going to save those questions till the end, so we'll make sure to carve out time at the end to answer those. And Sense will take care of distributing this panel recording to those who've registered, so look out for an email from us by tomorrow. All right, let's get to the good stuff and start by meeting our panel. And I'm going to ask these wonderful women with me today to introduce themselves and provide some background on their role and organization. And then a quick bonus question. Are you watching anything good on Netflix? Or do you have any pets in your house you can share with us? And we'll start with Celeste first.
Hi, Taryn. Thank you. I'm Celeste Goodis, and I'm currently the chair and founder of 24/7. 24/7 is a talent solutions provider. We work around the globe and we place talent predominantly in creative marketing and tech roles. And that would be full-time, freelance, part-time. We embed teams in companies anywhere that marketing work needs to get done and how our clients want to get that work done. So I founded the company like 23 years ago, and it's grown, and I'm so excited about where it is today. But when I started 24/7, I would say that diversity and inclusion weren't really terms that were being used, and yet we were a company that was, that our employee base was predominantly women, predominantly female. So we built, and I think, a company and really wove into the fabric of the culture of 24/7, just the concept of diversity and inclusion. So it's something that I've always believed in. I went to a women's college. My mother was my strength and support. So I've always, really respected all people, but really, of course, understanding where women came from in the workforce. So I think we wove in these policies, and I can talk more about that later. But back to the most important thing is my dogs. I have two Labradors, Addie and Gigi, who are waiting outside the door, and we hope they don't bark. And I also have a cat named Max. So, and in terms of lastly, but the best part is Netflix. I've been watching Fargo, and actually I just finished The Gilded Age and went up. I have 3 children, but I went up with my 2 daughters. These are all just post-college age, and they're living at home here, which has been lots of fun. But we just went up to Newport to see the mansion. So, I got to see where all the Gilded Age, many of the scenes were filmed. So I found it fascinating. So thank you. And thanks to my fellow panel speakers as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Celeste. We really love hearing about your personal story and your dogs too. I love that. What about you, Jen?
All right, my name is Jennifer Zweig. I'm the VP of Strategic Initiatives at Horizontal Talent, and I lead our DEI initiatives. Horizontal Talent is an organization that helps hire for IT, marketing, creative, and business strategy solutions for our clients. I do have over 20 years of experience in staffing and consulting, and I'm really excited to be here. And I want to tackle those really hard-hitting questions first. So Netflix. I have 3 young children, so I'm about 10 years behind on anything cool. But I could tell you all about Disney Plus, or I did get to see the Taylor Swift tour this weekend. So that's
Oh,
where
that's
I'm
great.
at. That's pretty
Awesome.
good.
I love that.
And I do have a 85-pound dog who thinks she's a human, and anybody that walks in the door, she will put her paws on you and try to hug you. So
Oh, that's
she's pretty
great.
fabulous. She
Oh,
welcomes all visitors.
love that. Thanks so much, Jen. And certainly last but not least, Anne.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be here with my fellow panelists. It's a great initiative to be here. My name is Ann Thakur. I am the Global Director of Strategic Accounts at eTeam, as well as the co-founder. Next month, it is going to be 25 years of us here. So a Silver Jubilee celebrations for my organization and my people. eTeam, a little bit about us. We are a global leader in talent solutions, helping Fortune 1000 companies in 89 plus countries today. As a part of the leadership team, I personally believe in transforming challenges into opportunities. One deal at a time. I personally have been very, very passionate about growth and building long-lasting partnerships with not just businesses, but real people behind those businesses. I personally give a lot of credit and my worth, it's not with my job title and responsibilities. I'm a mother of 2 unique children today, 20 and 17, who have helped me know myself, better in the past 20 years. And it may come as a surprise to all of you, but I also enjoy doing stand up and like to moonlight
Oh,
as an
Oh.
amateur stand up comedian.
that's
So now
wonderful.
I'm trying, to make people around me be happy and funny. And that's a little bit about us at eTeam and my journey. My Netflix, I love watching Selling Sunset. I have never missed a show on that. As of today, I'm watching Suits.
Oh, cool. Catching up with Suits. That's great.
Eh,
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to get this conversation started, to be with all of you, sharing great thoughts and opinions and experience you bring to the table. This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful conversation. So let's go ahead and start with internal diversity, equity, and inclusion. How can we ensure DEI at all levels of our organizations, particularly in leadership positions? And then also, initiatives like mentorship programs and employee resource groups are often talked about as methods to drive internal DEI, but how can we ensure they're effective? I'm going to go ahead and give this one to Anne.
Sure. Thank you, Tarun. ERGs and mentorship programs, they are great, but they often fall short of if you don't get your leadership involved. That's why I always encourage, our leadership to, take out time, from their busy schedule and get very involved and be a part of the community. For example, one of our own female leaders, whose name I'll keep to myself today, I encouraged her to be the real champion for our She Team initiative. She constantly takes part in discussions, in postings, on LinkedIn and social media, and all of the great work, that the program has done is posted on our sites as well. When our employees see that, our contractors see that, when they see that their leaders are pushing forward as well on such diversity initiatives and resource groups, they want to take part in that, right? They want to be and get a seat at the table in that particular community. And I think that is a very important aspect, and it's very something very special to me and a very important aspect. Besides just encouraging the leadership to champion such groups consistently, follow throughs, making sure that they are a paramount today in ensuring today that these programs are successful. So you're probably asking yourself, and like, what does that even mean? Let me tell you, it means that you must do the work today. These programs need not be the only championed by leaders, but funded by the company also. We have to allocate employee time and resources to build such groups today. It is very important to make sure that the follow throughs of these programs are happening, the employees are participating. We have to encourage them to do that, to take out time for this and provide them with enough bandwidth to spend time which is not going to be their free time, but ensure that they're working on this initiative. And I personally feel that that's how you empower these groups with and ensure that fostering a very positive and then inclusive environment, becomes the key for not just for the leaders, but everybody in the organization.
Absolutely. That was fantastic. I do agree that time and resources are, things that the company needs to consciously and purposefully set aside for employees to be able to actively focus on DEI initiatives.
Yeah,
And we've made a lot.
Jump
Oh,
in.
yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the ERGs, Anne, you had such a good point there. I think those resource groups are created and have leadership support, but having them led by the people for the people is so important. But also the leaders of those individuals, making sure they recognize that contribution and quietly supporting and guiding. It just is such an added layer of support and leadership buy-in that is recognized. So I couldn't agree more, Anne. That was a great response.
Yeah, I was just going to add something similar, but some of the things that we've found that have been the stickiest have been like the book club and things like that weren't necessarily started, in terms of or segmented, in a diversity manner, but really, they kind of commingle with people's personal interests. And so we also have a DEI speaker series that we bring in speakers from the outside several times a year, and that's been very popular as well. And I agree, you have to get, but everyone's so busy that it's sometimes hard to get the leadership into the groups, and so we've just and we have a new moms group, things like that, and those remain very popular and kind of running across DEI, if you would. So and then of course I do agree with you that mentorship and mentorship programs, those have been strong, and I think we've been able to that's some kind of, there's a lot in that for both the mentor and the mentee. So I think we've been able to sort of keep that going. But again, it takes constant work and feeding of these groups to sustain, I think.
Absolutely. Again, in addition to maybe time, resources, everyone's busy schedules, we've made a lot of progress in recent years, and there's more awareness around DEI than ever before. But are there issues that continue to persist or new challenges that have arisen? And Celeste, I'll have you start us off.
Well, I mean, I really feel like we're in a pendulum swinging right now. And I mean, we've all been through the pandemic and just the tragic George Floyd murder, and and there was such a call to really action after that, and now we're in a bit of a different place where corporations, I don't want to say they're cutting back, but they're being more careful about choices. In terms of just the recent court decisions. So I think I think it's actually making what we do a bit harder. But at the end of the day, we really know that that diversity, that having everybody be able to flourish and live up to their best being, is good for companies. It's good for business in the future. Millennials and Gen Zs, like they want to be part of a modern, diverse, workforce where people are allowed to flourish. So I think it's more important than ever that we keep the progress going. But I think, some of it really, for me, and the way I look at it now, is really working on some systemic issues and process issues, that may have contributed or continue to create bias within the organization. Rather than talking about quotas and all that. I mean, we don't, it's just, I'm really looking at how to create, long-term and systemic change.
Yeah, I would also agree. I think I have, as I mentioned, 3 young kids, and they are bi. And George Floyd's murder awakened many of us into a reality that shocked me personally into action. I had a team member on my staff who just struggled with what was happening in our country. And not only that, but how we as leaders reacted with our words, actions, or sometimes inactions. That time brought awareness that got me excited to do more, to be more, to put us into action. But you're absolutely right. now I read articles that talk about initiatives, and then I read another article that talks about how let's put a pin in DEI, or let's table that for now, or how it might be a bad thing. I think we need to be very aware that the good that diversity brings to an organization, the perspectives and the new thoughts that come to the table when we allow diversity in. I read a recent article on LinkedIn that had 84% of surveyed executives said a lack of DEI was partially responsible for high turnover rates. Organizations with DEI initiatives are 2.6 times more likely to boost employee retention. It's about that feeling of belonging and feeling included. It does improve employee engagement and retention, and we can't let that go away.
Thank you so much, Jen. I mean, another thing that is, another challenge and factor that has come up in recent years is the rise of remote work and how that's affecting DEI. Are things better now? Are there new ways of work, that allow some flexibility within organizations where people can work remotely? And what are the challenges that organizations are facing around that? How about you, Jen?
Yeah. The world has changed. How we do our work, how we manage our work, it definitely has changed. And there's challenges with it, but I do also believe there's opportunities with it. I believe with more hybrid and remote options, the availability of DEI, ERGs, mentorships are truly critical components to helping those workers feel connected. The beauty I found in those connections is sometimes they happen outside of your immediate team. You might feel truly connected to an individual you've never worked with or spoken to, or someone that's completely outside your department or realm, but maybe you hear them speak at a DEI meeting, or they share a story that just resonates with you. And there's real beauty in that. And I think we have to embrace that. And for another reason, those DEI, ERGs, and mentorships are more critical than ever.
Completely agree. That sense of belonging when we're in our Zoom squares is like, it's a new challenge, but it's a beautiful thing. We can connect with people across time zones and different parts of the world, and we're working side by side with them from our own living rooms, but together, which is great.
I would also just add to Jen's, comments, which I completely agree with. But I think also goes back to further training of our leaders, our managers, our leaders, because so much of, whether you feel like you belong really starts at the top, but, comes down. So these like development programs that people, that we put in place and that are in place for corporations, but I think are really important. But, there are techniques, I think, to working with a hybrid audience or entirely remote audience, and so or team. And I do think that one of the things that I see and that we're doing is really putting out more inclusion surveys just to see and kind of get temperature checks as to how people are feeling. Because you're not you're not having a coffee with them, there's a lot we're missing, I think, in the physical presence of others. So I think you have to do temperature checks more frequently and just check-ins more frequently. But it is an opportunity. I think it's both ways. There's great things that have come out of it when, people can have flexible schedules. It's allowed for, I would say, maybe a better balance. I've heard both ways on that, but but I do think it's just really empowering your leaders and managers and giving them training, to be able to work in this environment.
That's great. And we'll definitely talk about training in this presentation as well. I want to hear a little bit more detail on that. But I guess beyond the anecdotal successes and the stories within your organizations that you're hearing and the how times have changed, I want to go back to like how we can measure the impact of DEI. That's a tough one. It's it's a tough question and a challenge for each organization to tackle, and it probably looks different at every organization. Celeste, you mentioned surveys, but Anne, how is that working in your organization to ensure that a real difference is being made?
Absolutely. As Celeste had rightly put it earlier as well, I think measuring the impact, it relies heavily on identifying first, the metrics and the parameters for those success, because D&I, success, at least for us, we look at it very vastly differently from some of the other companies could be that who are focused on just performative, successes, right? A few tricks, maybe to get it right is firstly to track diversity, metrics, monitoring changes in the workplace, demographics mainly for me, I feel is important. This would highly include representations at various hierarchy levels, in recruitment, even in promotions. For us as an organization, we pay very close attention to the retention rates, that is very important, promotion rates, looking at disparities today, addressing them, in a formal process and a manner very promptly. We conduct pay equity analysis, regularly, to ensure that fairness in compensation across all the demographics is taken place of. We also evaluate leadership behaviors and promote inclusive leadership practices internally, through a 360-degree, feedback mechanisms. We ourselves, consider our organization's community's impact through DNI initiatives and, of course, various partnerships in place that we have today, as well as many different, supplier diversity efforts, to promote the inclusivity, in our own supply chain. Us as co-founders, we ourselves, coming from diverse communities. So DNI, is more personal as well than professional. So we take this very, very personally, and that is why 80% of our leadership today are diverse. We measure those participation ratios, those levels, in the ERGs. We use them as a very valuable part of feedback, mechanism for even understanding employee experiences all around the world, in fact. And not only that, but just benchmarking, our own internal DNI metrics, against the industry standards, which help us also identify some of the areas, which can lead for improvement. And of course, that can help us refine our policies, accordingly. And that has been a year by year progress for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And you touched on hiring a bit and some of the metrics there. And so it's a great segue into our next topic about diversity hiring. I want to see some of the hiring trends we're seeing in the recruiting space. So let's touch on how we can make our employment opportunities appealing to diverse candidates and hire people from a variety of different backgrounds. So how is, forming relationships with, say, universities, community organizations, professional networks effectively run at your organization? And are there other ways to attract diverse candidates that maybe we're all overlooking?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, this is a work in progress. Every organization is still doing it, but how we are able to track diversity, and diverse talent pipelines. And of course, make sure our employment opportunities are also appealing, to the underrepresented groups today. Are these tactics that we are, like forming relationships with the universities, community organizations, underrepresented groups, professional network effective, or are there other ways to attract diverse candidates that may be overlooked today? So what is more important is there are some ways campus engagement has been a cornerstone of our strategy. Our team, internal team, we understand the importance of creating a very welcoming environment for the students from various backgrounds. We are focusing on fostering genuine collections. Our VPs, our portfolio VPs, they lead our campus outreach programs, where they are directly engaging, with the students and sharing, their career experiences also, from where they came from, how they grew, how they enabled, and what they are doing, for the junior folks in the industry. They connect with these students, on a personal level as well, offer any career guidances, or any guidelines that they can, additionally, since there are several industry experts, that represent, e-team, they share industry trends, challenges, providing students with, I feel very insightful information about their journey and about how our organization today and in the field overall as a whole. This approach has allowed us personally, to go above and beyond, not just one of career fairs, right? But also building long-term partnerships, with the universities, with the students, our training workshops and seminars, We involve team members, sharing their expertise as well, and engaging with students, specific topics, referrals from various different diverse workforce, play a very crucial part as well in our talent acquisition efforts. Our own internal team members, we are encouraged to refer, qualified candidates, from diverse backgrounds, leveraging their own network, to attract, good and top talent to our organization. These are few of the many. I feel it's still a work in progress, and as an industry as a whole, can do a lot more better. But it's every one person at a time, right, and one individual at a time can enable this. So we're very excited about this and where we've led the path and where this is going for our organization.
That's great. It sounds like everyone in your organization has the recruiting hat on, from employee referrals to leadership teams speaking, and everyone representing your organization very well to have the broadest outreach. That's wonderful.
And I would add to that too, that, one of the things that we're just doing in general is sort of widening the base of where and how we recruit. I think we had some, and I think some of the bias that was inherent, over the years is just, you had this notion that you wanted to recruit out of a certain firm or a competitor or something, and that really kind of limited, the pool of talent and the range of skills and of course diversity. So, I think we're conscious of, I'm kind of going to the next bullet a little bit, but I think we're conscious of trying to work on the biases that we have, a few hundred recruiters, right? And just the biases that we all have internally. So, coaching and training on standardized interviewing, et cetera, and how to sort of think about those biases and work around that. But one of the challenges we have too, and I think this may play a bit into Jen and possibly Ann as well, is that we find talent to place in companies, right? So, we can do our job of bringing this diverse slate to the table, but then we really have to provide the thought leadership to our clients in a sense, and there you go, there's a play on words for you there.
Like that.
Use sense. But
Mhm.
no, to really, just kind of, so that they're also thinking about, the pool of talent that they're interested in interviewing. And I think one of the big changes that happened was really in 2022 when we had the Great Resignation, and we couldn't find enough talent, right? So.
Sure.
So I think we found that clients were willing to look, at a broader spectrum of talent. So I think that has, something we've been able to continue.
Thanks, Celeste. And you touch on biases, and they happen. But within your organizations, what biases typically occur that you have helped take steps to prevent? What about you, Jen?
Yeah, I think anybody that's been through a training
Yeah.
on this knows it's real.
Yeah.
Unconscious and conscious bias. It's a
Yeah.
real thing. Some of the things that I take away is it's easy to like a candidate sight unseen because you're familiar with their background, whether it was the university, an area that you're familiar with the business fraternity, sorority. We gravitate to what we know, and that can be harmful in weeding out diversity without even meaning to, with possibly the best intentions, right? I've seen so many different efforts to counteract this, whether it's through trainings or removing or repressing, hiding some of that information from resumes. But I think some of the best trainings is really just making sure your recruiters, your talent acquisition is open to seeing how the unconscious bias works, coming up with ideas, being aware of it. How do we contradict that or try and combat it as much as possible? As a staffing organization, I think one of the things that's been really helpful for us is we have to do that internally with our recruiters, but also with our clients as well. So sometimes maybe it's matching a candidate's skill set based off of truly just the skill set and not even showing a resume or a background and just walking through the skill set. And that's one of the ways to remove some of the bias from it and just matching the best candidate for the job. But it continues to be a work in progress. And I think the continuing training and awareness of it is one of the most important things we can keep doing.
Great. Yeah. I love that you're involving your team in solutions and having those internal goals, because again, it can look different at each organization. So, touching on training, thanks for bringing that up. Like, what training has been effective for your hiring teams? And again, this looks different at every organization, but how are you conducting inclusive interviews and a positive hiring experience for every candidate? Celeste?
Yeah, well, we do have a fabulous training team internally, and they work with absolutely every one of our employees at some point. But I think what's really been helpful for us over I guess it's been 3 years now, we've been part of an organization called Paradigm, which is basically, an organization that supports DEI and B within organizations, but they have they're pretty robust platform. And that platform's like blended learning. So some of it's remote, but they use speakers, and they cover, just about every area that you can think of. And they're very strong on biases and bias training. And there's like 13 of them, by the way, I can't even list them all, but they're all there. So, but I think we've been able to do like short sprints with our teams. We require everybody that's joining the organization, to log on to the platform. So that's been something, every organization's a different size and different priorities. And in order to keep this sort of fluid and up to date and relevant for our teams, that's been quite successful.
Thank you. Thanks so much. This has truly been an amazing discussion so far. So I'll move on from diversity hiring. And we have a great audience here who's like very interested in this topic. And it's been truly a great discussion so far. So thank you so much. But we'll take a step back a bit and share some advice, perhaps with employees who might be starting at square one in their organization with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so what are some initial steps that any talent leader and employee can take to start driving DEI efforts in their organization? Anne?
Sure. First of all, I can start off by, I feel that personally we need to get ourselves and, the team educated, right, on why the D&I is so important in the workplace, right? Why does it matter? We need to understand from that perspective is the benefits of having a D&I workforce and recognizing any biases, that you might have. I personally advise any talent leader, to first take steps to address, their own biases. There are plenty of free tools out there, which we can take, stock of our own preconceived notions in any constructive way. I've witnessed, how diversity could drive business growth and also foster innovation. It's really about getting to the top talent, regardless of the background, and the trust. And absolutely, your organization would be better for it. But here's, a few things, of course, that I personally feel has worked for us over the past 25 years. One is, making sure, that education to you and to your leaders is very important. Of course, taking a good look at where your company stands today, right now, and are there any obvious gaps in the diversity areas, where certain groups, can feel might be excluded, or included, make sure that, that's taken care of. This could be in any hiring practices. This could be in any promotions or even day-to-day interactions, right? Once we have a handle on that, I think setting some real expected goals are the key. What do you want to achieve with your D&I efforts? Maybe it's increasing diversity in leadership areas, or even making sure that everyone feels included and valued. Is simple as that. Then it's time to even put policies, procedures in place to make sure, you're walking the walk, right? It could mean about tweaking your hiring processes, to make it more inclusive. It could be also, implementing, basic training programs, to raise awareness, about those biases. Not only that, what is more important is never forget to involve the teams in that process, right? Have everybody there, creating simple, ERGs where people can come together, to support each other and advocate for change. Have lunch and learns, right? Yes, we are all remote today, but having, virtual lunch and learns, that is the best way, to have people, engage in that. It is very important to partner with diverse suppliers and, vendors, to show, your commitment as well on the DNI, and not just within your company, but I feel it is throughout the entire workforce solutions ecosystem. Transparency is very important. It is the key here. So make sure, firstly, you are keeping track, of those progresses as well. And that's why I mentioned earlier also in my message that follow through will be important. One is setting the ground and then following through as well, right? And holding yourself and your team accountable and driving those efforts, to bring that change as well. And finally, let me tell you, I think the answers always lie with your employees, right? You need to trust them. Listen, they are the ones who will ultimately be able to, tell you where those efforts are going, if they're working or not. Take that feedback seriously, keep tinkering on them, experimenting and adjust them accordingly, because one size does not fit all. So, redoing those things, making sure that you are updating, those policies as well, I think are very important. These are some that we follow as an organization, and I follow personally as a leader as well.
To piggyback off that, Anne, I love everything you said. I've had the opportunity to help start DEI, not from ground one, if you will, but pretty much early on in the infancy. And one of the common themes I've found is you don't have to have a ton of tools or resources or throw a ton of money at it. What you need is a team of people that are passionate about it. And I think the key, if you're starting or if you're getting started now, talk to your team, find those individuals that are committed to driving this forward and passionate about them. Let them help drive the mission statement, the goals, the parameters. And if you have that, it is what I think is really neat about that versus hiring an outside vendor is it starts organically with true passion for the right causes. And then you take pride in the results that you get. So I agree with everything you said, Anne. I love it so much.
It's very well highlighted, Jen.
Yeah. No, I love that too, Jen. I think that's right. We all need to show up, being our authentic selves, if you would, because that's reflected in the company. And something you said too, Anne, that I think is important is really having, certainly engaging the team, but having realistic goals. I think in the beginning too, we tried to accomplish a few years ago too many things. And I think, and even measuring, if you, whatever KPIs or however you want to measure what you've decided to work on, just have the ability to self-correct if that's not the direction, you want to go. Things are not really working. I mean, it's something I think you retool as you move on, and you need these, to your point, you need these spokespeople, if you would, or these leaders, these, folks that really believe in the mission, to be upfront with it. But what I would also say is that you're really keeping, we want to retain people too. So it's about attracting them and hiring them, but it's really about retention, and I think if you want to bring in a more diverse pool and have that, you have to have the support internally to, I've seen just within our clients, things just not work out, over short periods of time with different types of talent. And that's just because the support systems are not in place, even the basic support systems of mentorship and training. So I think you want to be able to think about, I think belonging might be the most important piece of this. So, I think it's just having those systems and thinking about that right up front as you're developing a plan. So.
Amazing insights. Like, I do love the fact that, yes, it starts with passion and bring our authentic selves to work and, gathering community and, making those connections and listening. And Yeah, absolutely. Anybody can start this at their organizations. And I think that next big leap and challenge that employees might face is like, how can we get that organizational wide buy-in and support? And what are some of the ways that our passionate employees can get the leadership to listen and buy in there? What about you, Jen?
Yeah, I will say I'm very lucky at Horizontal. We
Yeah.
take pride in being a minority-owned business. So many people join for that reason. Everybody values that DEI perspective so much. I'm very lucky to have a leadership team that believes in DEI, believes in the value, believes in making sure we have the engagement, and they see the benefits that come from it. And I truly think that's why we've had so much success lately. We've launched 4 ERGs. We've had some amazing educational events that have shared our employees' journeys and stories and help people feel very connected together. But to put the other side of that, there are individuals in the world that don't believe in it, or they do it to quote check and box. So I think it's a good perspective to have. We don't need to convince everyone, but we need to keep pushing forward. We need to keep talking about it over and over again. I had someone ask me once a while ago, why are we always having to learn about people that are different than us? Can't we just celebrate our similarities? To which I responded, sure, there's similarities that we could celebrate. But from my perspective, the more I learn about people that are quote unquote different than me, the more connections I find, the more similarities I find that we have together. And I think that's, again, one of the best things I come from the learning and hearing the shared journeys and hearing about each other and these educational efforts that we have. So I think we just need to keep doing that and keep moving forward.
I would just add to that. I love that about Horizontal. That's great. So I think that it does stem, from, I really do believe, there's a lot of top down here. I mean, you want an authentic leader and you want that leader to be able to, just communicate and live the values. But I think it's also important to weave it into your mission and values, and to really, talk about that, no matter what you do, kind of weaving it in continually. I think communication and messaging is really, really important, and it has to be consistent and over time. It's not. I feel that again, with the pendulum swinging a bit, we have to maintain, that authenticity and keep that communication about who we are, why we are what we do, what's our purpose, and really kind of keep weaving, the, again, the inclusivity theme and that sense of, I just really like to talk about it as letting, everyone be the best they can be and let everyone flourish. I think it's really important.
Yes. When everyone flourishes, we flourish as a team, and that's what really builds a successful workplace. And so, all right. The future of DEI. Let's wrap things up by looking ahead. What are some of the emerging trends and how can we keep that momentum up? Especially from what we've seen in recent years, like with the challenges, like how do we keep that momentum going in your organization in the future? Celeste?
Yeah, I was just nodding because when I'm just thinking about this now, we're bringing in, AI into our technologies, as I'm sure you all are, in different ways, right? Some for efficiency, some, for different aspects of really looking at the business and the processes. And so I think that's going to be something we really have to keep our eye on, because right now we know there's a lot of inherent bias in AI, and how that moves forward. That's a concern for me. And I think, we've heard that, in the news around AI. So I think that's something to continue to think about as we move more into really a different world. I believe. I think technology is just accelerating at such a rapid pace right now. So I think we're going to have to, it's going to be even harder to just make sure. Again, I go back to, being authentic and being able to sustain the programs that we have, although they may change, they may evolve, but I think we really need to pay extra attention to, again, having our workforce feel included and and relevant, and that they belong, particularly in this age of, which is a really revolutionary in my thinking.
Yes, absolutely. Like our technology is becoming more and more human, and that includes bias too. So we have to ensure that we recognize that and can grow with the times. And but
One
yeah.
last thing. I mean, I also have a lot of
Yeah.
hope for the next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
I love them. I mean, I don't know, the Gen Zs, I love them, and
Yes.
the millennials. I mean, they really have a different, I think, kind of wonderful mindset about the future and people and diversity. And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that, it's going to be a more inclusive world. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Great segue, because I would love to know about your personal hopes and aspirations for the future of diversity and inclusion in workplaces. And I'll let everyone speak to this. Maybe we'll start off with Anne. And again, what are your personal wants in this space? And Anne, you're on mute.
We all should have a
There we
t-shirt
go.
on mute. Yeah, this is a very, personal question as well, and a very important question, especially, I am raising teenagers, right? My daughter is 20, my son is, 17. And, for them, right, the younger generations, it is very important, that, as parents, right, as leaders, we constantly talk to them, right? Because they are the future, right, of our organization, hopefully, hoping that they join us as well, or wherever they go, they are embedded in understanding, how D&I is important, right, for their parents, who came, from India and have worked, towards, coming here and at this stage as well, and working to where we are, trying to achieve and where we are going with this. So it is, of course, very crystal clear, that the younger generations are increasingly, drawn, to companies that prioritize DE&I. And rightfully so, I feel, prioritizing the diversity, and of course, fostering an inclusive work environment here at E-Team, we have been able to tap into wealth of benefits, that just go beyond just meeting with the social, and ethical responsibilities. For us within our organization, it is our aim, at E-Team, to transcend more demographics. We are dedicated to cultivating, a very diverse culture, that celebrates all forms of diversity, thoughts, experiences, backgrounds, your abilities. This means, you know, we are ensuring and creating an environment where every voice, is heard, is respected and valued. We're very proud today to be a certified minority business enterprise, underscoring, of course, our commitment, to supporting diversity, in broader business landscape today. Looking ahead, I personally feel that I'm very, very optimistic, that more leaders are recognizing this and will continue to recognize, the tangible benefits, of a diverse workforce on the bottom line. Studies I personally feel have been consistently showing that the diverse teams, bring more ideas, different viewpoints, a greater creativity as well to the table. It's a direct line, to be more effective into various different marketing strategies, or even a deeper connection, with the sales teams. On top of that, I personally am very excited about the potential of, yes, artificial intelligence, so AI systems that are helping us, eliminate the biases as well from an interview, to the hiring process as well. In a sense, I personally feel, and my vision for the future of D&I is going beyond numbers. It's about fostering a culture of inclusivity, innovation, and has to be success for everyone around.
Right.
Thank you.
I love that. I love the, innovation. And I really think the workplace is going to look very different, the future of work. is going to, I think boundaries are going to come down. I think these walls that we have up as companies, I mean, this is my vision, but I just think that some of that's going to come down and that we're going to have flexible work teams. I think that, companies may share talent will move around. And I see that as, I see that as a positive, thing. And as these boundaries come down, I think a lot of the inherent, walls that are up right now will come down. It's just, I really think we're going to see, with talent in the workforce in many ways, having, new, I don't want to say just power, but new ways of, negotiating, working, being, so I'm really hopeful for the future. And I think innovation, again, I agree with Anne, is going to be critical and key. So I'm positive about the future, and I love remote work, hybrid work, all the changes that are happening, and I think it's good for the worker, actually. So
What you, Jen?
I mentioned on the front end, my kids asking really hard questions around race and equity that kind of spurred me into action. My team members sharing with me very vulnerably their challenges that they were going through and that they saw that opened my eyes what we can do. And when I think of hope in the future, I just hope that our future hires, our kids, our next generation are able to enter the workforce in a place where they feel welcome and included. And that is the norm and not the exception. That the work we're doing today is going to create an environment that no matter what their pronoun is, their race, their religion, whatever they identify with, that they come in and they feel safe and they know they're supported. I'm just excited to keep moving forward, keep trying. I mean, there's going to be technology changes, there's legislative changes, there's AI updates, there's going to be continual learning, and we need to keep learning and evolving with it. And I know this is the one thing that I take away. We're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to be perfect. But I think we're all trying to do the right thing. And I think for right now, we just can't stop doing the work.
I love that. You're right. It's always going to be work in progress, and trends and times are going to change, and we just have to continue to grow and be flexible and be open to learning. And that's wonderful. And thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. Perhaps we've answered everyone's questions because we haven't gotten any in, but I'm going to give everyone like 30 seconds. Our audience, if you have any questions, please type those in the Zoom chat. We'll be sure to get those questions answered for you now. And so I just want to, again, say thank you so much. Like, it's been a pleasure hosting and speaking with each of you, Celeste, Jen, and Anne. It's I've loved getting to know you and prepping for this conversation, and continuing to have like this important topic as top of mind.
I think it's great that you brought this topic to the forefront again, because as I said, I feel like the pendulum's shifting a bit. So this was, I hope, helpful. Just hearing what other companies are doing, where people's ideas are, is always good. Yeah.
I've certainly learned a lot, so I appreciate that. And yes, it's been a wonderful conversation. All right. Well, we must have answered everyone's questions, which I think is great. Maybe we had the right questions lined up for all of you to speak upon and touch on. So want to thank you again, and I guess we'll wrap up here. And thank you so much for joining us today, everyone in our audience. Appreciate you coming live, and this recording will also be shared if you want to share this out with any of your teammates and people who are passionate and want to kick off DEI programs at their workplaces. And again, we'll share this content out for all registrants by tomorrow. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.